A Year Since Beverly, a Channel 9 news special. Now, Al Shuttlecutty.
Once upon a time, people in our town believed that a disaster was something that could only happen to others. We lived too normally for anything massively destructive or ruinous to visit itself upon us. Now we've learned. The tornadoes literally whipsawed us into a realization that it can happen here. But even the twisters, which inflicted incredible damage on our neighborhoods at intervals in the last half-dozen years, didn't match the horror of the Beverly Hills fire in terms of sudden human agony and impact. 165 people died. More than 100 others were injured. In that year since Beverly burned, much has taken place. It's not easy to bring it all into focus, but with the aid of Channel 9 editors and reporters, we'll try. Because the Beverly Hills fire means the Coconut Grove Holocaust that took 492 lives in Boston 35 years before apparently didn't teach us a thing. And there are those who agree this time we need to keep looking and try to learn. 1 year later, this is all that is left of what once was billed as the showplace of the nation. Soon the site will be leveled, with no physical presence of the almost Hollywood-like setting which was Beverly Hills. The cabaret room featured the top stars of show business. Meetings and dinners regularly filled the club's many other rooms. And in recent years, Beverly was the site of frequent weddings. There was nothing quite like it outside Las Vegas. The club was packed on that night of death for a performance by singer John Davidson. Exactly how many people were at Beverly that night never has been established, but it apparently was well above the legal occupancy limit of 1,600. At about 8:45 or 8:50, club employees discovered a fire in the Zebra Room off the main area. It was electrical in origin and had apparently been burning for some time in the concealed spaces behind the ceilings and walls. Employees tried to put it out and sounded the alarm. The word never got to the cabaret room until sometime later when a busboy made the announcement. The evacuation was orderly. At the Zebra Room, the fire that had been building up behind the facade, by that time had built up so much heat that the room and all its furnishings literally exploded into flames, sending dense smoke and hot gases flying down the corridor to the cabaret room, which was packed. The flames soon followed, consuming paneling and carpeting, further adding to the smoke and fumes. When the smoke began rolling into the cabaret room, panic set in. Survivors say there was a mass rush for the two exits on the Alexandria Pike side of the club. The other exits were soon cut off by the fire in the corridor. Those still inside were quickly overcome by the fumes. This series of photographs was taken by Joseph Lalonde of Springfield, a cabaret room patron, whose party left before the panic set in. Firemen quickly abandoned any hope of saving the building and concentrated on getting victims out and reviving them. The effort continued as the fire spread throughout the building, consuming virtually the entire structure. Finally, at around 10:20, all firefighting and rescue personnel were ordered out, and the true dimensions of the tragedy began sinking in. It was a night of horror. John Davidson, who escaped the fire, still won't talk about it. His music arranger was among the fatalities. Davidson was among hundreds of people who showed up at the hospitals that night for word on loved ones. But by then, it was painfully obvious that hospital care was too late for scores of people. The Fort Thomas Armory became the temporary morgue. Jim Cavanaugh returned 1 year later.
Unlike a year ago, there aren't any people outside, but there are some similarities which are striking. There's construction going on at the Veterans Administration Hospital next door, as there was a year ago. The parking lot between the Armory and the hospital is full, as it was then. And the Armory itself looks exactly the same today as it did on that Sunday morning in May in 1977. The things I remember most about that day include the long line of hearses that came up to the back door here, the contingent of young people, teenagers, who helped out with the unloading of bodies into the morgue for identification. But the one impression that will last the longest with me, at least, is that of all of the families of the deceased coming in and going through rows of bodies to identify their loved ones.
165 died in the fire, hundreds escaped, but many suffered deep mental anguish. To help such persons, a fire aftermath center was established at the University of Cincinnati. Carl Mark, a cabaret room bartender, is one who was helped by the center.
It's not easy to just get up out of your home and say, oh, I'm going to go down to the center and see what's going on. Maybe they can help me. It's a really hard thing to do, but I just think they can help a lot of people. I've been through it, and I've been to the center, and the center, with my good friends, have really helped me.
Most survivors did not seek help at the center, but went through their own emotional hell and came out profoundly changed.
We're more maybe grateful and thankful to be here, and more grateful, for what we have, and the chance just to be here as our two kids grow up.
I could not really believe that this was going on, and of course, I think that I might have been guilty of misplaced values, as others might be when they're not faced with their own death, and of course that stood out in my mind.
Captain Peter Sabino, a 22-year veteran of the Cincinnati Fire Department, was in the main corridor waiting to get into the cabaret room when the staff passed the word. Sabino and his family got out safely. Then Sabino went back and helped in the rescue effort. He's gotten many awards for bravery in the past year, but that's not his most vivid memory.
I had a hold of a woman, and just about at the time when I had as much as I could take, and I had to leave her. That's the big thing.
But there wasn't anything that you could have done?
No, really. Just had to get out. That was it.
Almost everyone in the tri-state was affected by what happened at Beverly Hills. For some, it was an individual experience. For others, a collective tragedy. Certain small communities lost many family members and friends. Larry Gelman has the story of one of those communities.
Wayne Township is a rural community just outside the small city of Trenton in Butler County. Most of the people here had never been to Beverly Hills. Perhaps that's why the Posh Supper Club was selected as the site of a retirement party for a teacher at Wayne Elementary School last May. 37 people attended the party. 13 of them were killed in the fire. The funeral service for those in the Edgewood School District party was held a few days after the fire. At the time, the biggest concern was the impact the fire might have on youngsters, particularly those here at the Wayne Elementary School, which lost 7 teachers and staff people. The reminders of the tragedy are apparent: a memorial plaque in the school lobby, an increased emphasis on fire drills and fire safety. But to the surprise of most people, the children adjusted to the loss well. Better, in fact, than many of the adults. Only a handful of students and teachers felt they emotionally could not finish up school last spring. This year, the school appears on an even emotional keel. The principal, Kenneth Hackler, was in the party at Beverly that night. In the years since, Hackler says it has been difficult at times.
Of course, the big question we had, or at least I had, why? Why did it happen to us? Or why did it happen the evening we were there? Why were the 13 people of our group killed? Why wasn't it me? Did God have something else planned for us? These kinds of things, and naturally these are questions we'll never know the answers to.
And Principal Hackler says, though the experience has been a trying one, there has been some positive benefit.
It's made us more aware of fire in this building itself. We practice quite frequently on evacuating the building, and I think it's made us more aware of things that can happen, but we think that might not happen or will not happen. It personally has given me an entirely outlook on life, and I'm just tremendously happy to be alive, and it could have easily been me.
A year is a long time, and people can forget a lot. But it's clear that the people here at Wayne Elementary School haven't been able to completely forget the tragedy which claimed almost half of the school staff members 1 year ago.
Beverly Hills employed more than 250 people, many of whom had worked there since the Shillings purchased it. 5 members of the club's house band perished in the cabaret room. For the surviving employees, it's been a difficult year, and many still are reluctant to talk about the fire. Among those is busboy Walter Bailey, the teenager who ran onto the stage in the cabaret room and warned of the fire. Bailey's actions saved many lives, And in a tragedy which had many unsung brave people, Bailey was, briefly, a well-known hero across the country. Bailey still lives in this area, but keeps a very low profile. Fellow Beverly employees say he's tired of the publicity. On the other hand, there are many former Beverly employees who are highly visible these days as they pick up the pieces. Hugh Dermody reports.
If you frequent any of the Cincinnati or Northern Kentucky restaurants, there's a good chance that you're going to find yourself running into a former Beverly Hills employee. Customers at the New Orleans restaurant downtown may find something vaguely familiar about this woman. Try picturing Dottie Everly in a white tie and tails, the uniform she wore as assistant head hostess at the Beverly for more than 6 years.
We've all were there for maybe 6 or 7 years, and you become such a close-knit family. Even each of us have different areas that we worked in because everybody had different groups, party girls, bus boys, whatever, you know. But it's like you were such a close-knit family that this is what you wanted to do, was stay together. You didn't want to let a fire pull you apart and keep you apart.
Another New Orleans employee is Steve Wilson, a waiter. Wilson was a busboy at the Beverly. He started at the New Orleans last week after a year's worth of jobs. Wilson, like many other Beverly employees, found himself dwelling on the fire, asking himself if he could have done anything more to prevent the tragedy. He says the reactions many Beverly employees still get from other people make it hard to forget.
I usually just pass over the subject or not let it be known to where I was working at because, I don't know, most people don't seem to go at it from just an interested point of view. They want to hear, you know, tell me some gore, tell me something that happened, and I spent a year trying to forget all that. I don't want to go into all the details of what happened that night.
Another restaurant, the new White Horse Tavern in Edgewood, has a large contingent of Beverly employees, including Cindy Shilley, one of 4 sisters who worked at the Beverly.
It took a lot for me to be able to sleep at night, to not think about it, hear people screaming. It's brought me a lot closer to my family. I mean, a lot closer. I don't like to go a day go by without talking to my sisters, you know, make sure everything's all right with them.
Ray Howcraft was a maitre d' at Beverly. He's now maitre d' at Valentino's and also manages a Frisch's. Howcraft says most of the employees have made an adjustment from the fire, but many are holding out a big hope.
They all went out, and some people took jobs right away, and it wasn't to their liking, and they shifted around. But I think as of now, a year later, everybody's settled in the job that they enjoy most. It's not what they really want, I don't think. I think if Beverly reopened tomorrow, they'd all go right back.
The hope of whether or not there'll be a new Beverly Hills Supper Club might just remain a hope, a dream for some former Beverly Hills employees, but right now that dream or that hope keeps many of them together in a very tight-knit family that continues even today, a year after the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire.
The strain was evident on the face of Dick Schilling as he and his 3 sons made their only public appearance since the fire in September. It was at the offices of their attorneys, who quickly made it clear that they'd advised the Schillings to say absolutely nothing about the fire because of the massive amount of litigation which developed. The Schillings did say absolutely nothing and have maintained that silence to this day. Until the fire, Schilling was outgoing and animated. He lived for the club, and more often than not could be found greeting and mingling with his guests. Schilling wasn't afraid of hard work, and he brought his 3 sons, Ron, Rick, and Scott, into the operation from the bottom up. They learned the business the same way he had. In recent years, the Schilling boys had assumed more and more the responsibility for running the club. Part of it was health. At the time of the fire, Dick Schilling was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, recuperating from surgery, and it was virtually certain that he would have retired from active management of the club entirely in a few years. Until recently, Schilling was still recuperating. From all reports, he and his sons have not been able to do very much since the fire. Any plans the family has have been tied up by the litigation. The Schillings had announced plans just before the fire to add a motel and convention complex to the Beverly operations. There have also been reports the Schillings would open a club in Florida. Any plans along those lines obviously depend on the outcome of the lawsuits. The effects of the fire have been long-lasting in other areas as well. The community of Southgate, for example, has undergone some substantial changes. 1 year ago, the city of Southgate was like any number of other small suburban communities around the country. Beverly Hills changed all that. For weeks after the fire, Southgate was a focus of worldwide attention. It was difficult enough to deal with the notoriety, but the community found itself with other immediate problems. The biggest was financial. Taxes from the Beverly operation represented a quarter of the city's yearly budget. Over the past year, the Southgate Council has tried to wrestle with that and other money difficulties, including $12,000 in legal fees so far. The council is also enacting a new fire code. Mayor Kenneth Paul was a familiar face in the days after the fire, a haggard face as well. 1 year later, Paul concedes Southgate still has big problems, but he points to development plans which would strengthen the city's tax base. Whatever, Southgate has been changed forever by the Beverly fire. The past year has been a difficult one for Paul personally, he and his family. He says he's neglected his family and found out some hard truths about holding public office.
Shows a great responsibility to all elected officials, even if you're in a small city. What can happen? Because you can't sit back in your chair and say, I've got a good future coming financially for the city, I'm well established, because tomorrow all that can change. And to be a good leader, you've got to be able to accept the change, and you've got to be able to put the time and the effort into it.
Another official whose life has been changed is Campbell County Coroner Fred Stein, who supervised the grim job of identifying the bodies. 1 year later, Dr. Stein, a pediatrician by training, finds himself a sought-after source in how to handle mass tragedy.
Well, I guess it's something like a bad dream, that going through something like that with the enormity of the number of casualties and the grief of people that came to try to find their loved ones. It's not a very pleasant experience.
In September, the Commonwealth of Kentucky issued its official investigative report on the fire, prepared under the direction of Chase Law School professor Ovid Lewis. The report charged wholesale code violations at the club, as well as neglect of duty by some state officials. It has had some impact, as Channel 9's Nancy Clark reports from Frankfort.
1 year later, the same laws that were in force in Kentucky at the time of the Beverly Hills fire are still in force, but not for long. The General Assembly, which met here at the state capitol earlier this year, passed 2 pieces of legislation which substantially alter fire and building code regulations in the Commonwealth. Among the provisions of the new fire code is the power for inspectors to force an immediate closing of premises in violation and to impose criminal penalties as well, up to $1,000 fines and maximum 60-day jail terms for violators. The new laws also provide that local governments have to adopt the provisions. The responsibility for enforcing the new law is on Robert Estep, the new state fire marshal who replaced Warren Southworth, suspended by Governor Carroll in the weeks following the Beverly Hills investigation. Estep candidly admits that cities like Southgate will have a difficult time financially affording the new provisions.
The new law puts the burden of enforcement on the local governments. How can a small town like Southgate afford an inspection team that this law would need?
This is a question I haven't answered myself yet. I wish I could. It's going to be very complicated, very difficult to implement. Whether or not our inspectors at the present time will become instructors, I don't know. I really wish I could answer your question, but we haven't answered it completely in our office.
There have been some major administrative changes in Estep's office as well. Building plans, which used to be destroyed after 5 years, making detection of possible violations much more difficult, will soon be going into permanent microfilm files. The office now has nearly 24 more inspectors than it did 1 year ago, and the inspectors don't knock off at 4:30 in the afternoon as they did before Beverly. They now work into the evenings when most overcrowding violations occur. Assistant Attorney General John Hill has been assigned to the Fire Marshal's office. His sole responsibility to give legal interpretations of the code and aid in prosecution of violators. Another official in charge of enforcement is State Police Commissioner Ken Brandenburg, a soft-spoken former college administrator whose solemnity through the weeks of the police investigation in northern Kentucky after the fire matched the tone of his sobering task. Brandenburg smiles a bit more these days, but not when he thinks about Beverly Hills.
There are many, many times that I have really experienced an emotion of depression, I suppose. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, so I really don't know how to describe it, but there are times when I really shudder to think that many people died and were injured, when if only one or two other things had happened that did not happen, we probably would not have lost anyone, or certainly would not have had the toll that we had.
The man responsible for many of the changes in the Commonwealth 1 year later is Governor Julian Carroll. The governor was on the scene of the fire within hours, the massive impact of the tragedy visible in his every expression. Later, when the Commonwealth report came out, Carroll was outraged.
I was, of course, angry on that night, knowing what could have been done that wasn't. And I remain angry to the point that it really is very, very frustrating to know that that kind of action could have possibly saved most, if not all, of the lives that were lost in Beverly Hills.
Changes have been made in the Commonwealth, and more are expected. There was also a spate of legislation in Ohio, but that has fared differently. Channel 9 Midwest correspondent Bill Payer reports from Columbus.
The public shock over the Beverly Hills tragedy led to the introduction of two pieces of legislation here in Columbus. Cincinnati State Representative Richard Finan proposed requiring that the public be notified of emergency exit ways in places of public assembly. Dayton Representative Paul Leonard proposed requiring sprinkler systems in new construction of such facilities and smoke detectors in existing buildings where sprinklers would be prohibitively expensive or otherwise impractical. Both measures are being allowed to die through lack of support in the House Interstate Cooperation Committee. Leonard had a personal interest in the Beverly Hills fire. His sister and her husband were at the nightclub, and two members of their dinner party lost their lives. 1 year later, Leonard is bitterly disappointed by the inaction on his and Finan's proposals.
To a lot of legislators, it didn't happen close to home. It didn't affect constituents from their district. It didn't affect their relatives, and so they choose to do nothing. I would imagine it will take a tragedy in the state of Ohio of similar proportions affecting some of the Ohio legislators before anything of substance will pass in this legislature.
There is a piece of legislation with a chance to be enacted yet this year that would require a beefing up of the training and professionalism of fire safety inspectors. And Ohio has officially opened a new Firemen's Training Academy. But in terms of direct response designed to avoid a tragedy like the Beverly Hills fire here in the Buckeye State, the Ohio General Assembly has been silent.
There have also been efforts at federal law changes, but progress has been slow. Nearly 4 months after the fire, a congressional subcommittee, including Cincinnati Congressman Thomas Lucan, held hearings on the fire at the University of Cincinnati. The idea behind the hearings was to help determine if national fire codes were needed. So far, a House committee has approved an appropriation for an official study of the question. In the meantime, President Carter, in a budget-cutting move, tabled measures to set up a national fire college. Congress is not likely to restore that money either. Lucan today says Congress is looking at a variety of fire safety legislation, but admits Washington is moving at a snail's pace.
There are 12,000 people killed every year. As a matter of fact, the fire protection is so bad that we don't even know how many people are killed every year. We don't even have the statistics. But we do know that we lose far more proportionately than any other country, any other civilized country when it comes to losses of life and property damage due to fire. So we've got a problem that we should address, and we could do better, obviously.
One of the most visible changes has been on the local level. If nothing else, Beverly Hills has made people, including those charged with enforcing the fire laws, a lot more fire conscious. Cincinnati's fire department quickly stepped up its inspections in large occupancy buildings and has been cracking down stronger than ever on such code violations as overcrowding. Cincinnati Fire Chief Bert Luginanni maintains a tragedy of the magnitude of Beverly is unlikely in Cincinnati. And if it would occur, it would be for reasons his department couldn't control, like an act of God.
We've looked over our buildings and very closely. Certainly my assistants, chiefs and marshals, company officers have been aware of this. They've been looking at areas that we might have a possible serious situation, and we just haven't come up with any. If we had, we would be working on them.
In the years since Beverly, there's been another group acutely conscious of the ramifications of this nation's worst fire in 35 years, the legal community. These documents represent the paperwork involved in just one portion of the massive litigation which has developed from Beverly Hills. So far, more than 90 lawsuits seeking nearly $2 billion have been filed. The plaintiffs could ultimately total more than 200, and the named defendants already come to more than 1,000. In addition to the Schilling family, some state officials and architects, the plaintiffs are suing such diverse parties as the manufacturers of chairs used in the club and the companies involved in making the paneling used on the walls. Major manufacturers of electrical wiring and components have also been named. So has Union Light Heat and Power, the Northern Kentucky subsidiary of Cincinnati Gas and Electric. The plaintiffs claim the utility violated the law in providing power to the club when it was allegedly used in violation of safety standards. It's the same reasoning which has led the plaintiffs' attorneys to name some 900 insurance companies members of 2 insurance associations. The plaintiffs say member companies of the associations were negligent in issuing insurance for Beverly Hills when it allegedly did not meet the safety standards. All of this, presumably, is based on the deep pocket theory, that practical legal maxim which dictates that suit is filed against the parties most likely able to afford to pay if a judgment is won. Attorney Gene Mesh, one of 13 lawyers on the lead counsel committee for the plaintiffs, says he doesn't know what size the verdict would be if the defendants are found liable. His class action suit seeks $100 million, but Mesh says there's more than deep pocket reasoning involved.
You simply can't make a claim because a person has money and then you'd like them to pay you. You've got to have more than that. And through some of the discovery that some of the other lead counsel members have done, it became clear that there were other people who were, in our opinions, liable for the damages that have occurred.
For the past several months, a grand jury in Campbell County has been looking into possible criminal charges coming out of the fire. The jurors are poring over some 15,000 pages of evidence collected by the state police and questioning an unknown number of witnesses. About the only thing certain in all this litigation is that it's likely to take months once it finally gets started, and probably years' worth of appeals as well. And so a year has passed since Beverly Hills burned, and the pleasure palace that glittered atop a Southgate hilltop turned into a torch and became a bier for scores of revelers. It remains vividly scorched into our memories. But even a disaster of the dimensions of Beverly Hills loses some of its numbing effect as the years pass. Already, even in this community, we've had recurring instances of nightclub overcrowding. And it'd be naive to believe on this weekend, on this Saturday night, in some city in this country, that there isn't another Beverly Hills waiting to happen.